This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. My name is Maxine Bell, and I am delighted to introduce you to a new series, A Day in the Life of. These podcast episodes will be released between our longer themed podcast series that you are already used to. We've been interviewing coaches for a while now under the theme A Day in the Life of for our LinkedIn newsletter, and they were so well received we wanted to offer them to a broader audience. The interviews are with real, everyday coaches across the globe from all walks of life who join me to honestly and bravely share their journeys into coaching, how they coach and run their business, what they love and what their challenges are, as well as how they integrate self-care into their practice. It's a real honour to get a sneak peek into their lives, and we hope that listening to their stories will inspire, encourage and assist you, whatever stage of your coaching journey you are on. Welcome to another episode of our wonderful Day in the Life series, and today I have with me Coach Leyla Okhai. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Maxine. I'm really delighted to be here.
It's great to have you here because you have a topic that's something we really need to know and understand and talk about. So would you like to share with the listeners what you do in your coaching practice at the moment?
Yeah, so my coaching centres around people at a crossroads. So a crossroads between wanting to progress in their life, whether that's in their job, we often think about career progression, or they want to progress in what they define as their family, or they want to progress in any way defined by them. And they also want to look after their mental health and well-being. And I find that I often coach people from diaspora or backgrounds that are non-white British because of my own personal background too.
That's really wonderful, but you do other things besides your coaching practice as well. I know you've got a podcast, haven't you? Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, thanks, Maxine. So my business is called Diverse Minds UK Limited, and my work centres around very practical mental wellbeing and culture and race equity and the bit where they meet in the middle. So how do we think about mental health, mental being, mental health, ill health recovery through a culturally appropriate lens? And my podcast, the Diverse Minds podcast, centres on this whole idea around mental health and inclusion in different ways, particularly workplace focused. And every month I have a theme. So this month just gone for Black History Month, we've been looking at narratives. So what are dominant narratives? How do you change them? What can you do in the workplace to change them? And then in the month coming up, we're going to be talking about gatekeepers. So you get a sense of kind of the wide plethora, because I think there's so much out there that talks about, well-being, go for a stretch and have a walk, without really looking at the system that underpins all of this, that creates mental illness and can stop people from recovering. And also when we talk about mental health and mental well-being, we're not necessarily talking about diagnosis. We're talking about having more challenging days and who can help you and what can help you with challenging days. And we know that systems can create barriers for people. A lot of the work that I do is centered around that. And also in the coaching, it's not about, and we know that coaching is always about the powerful questions, but I really come at it. I try and step away from, right, what are the goals? Go and think about, well, actually, how are you feeling at the moment and what might be causing that? What do you have control of? What do you not have control of?
Yeah, because goals in a way are meaningless if you're not in the right state, the right mental and emotional state to do that. So it's a key area, I think.
I agree. And I think society is too focused, particularly in the global north, too focused on these goals. And I saw something this morning, actually, on one of the social media platforms, and it said, the world needs fewer people who are preoccupied with their own success and more people who are healers, givers, storytellers, and kind. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And I thought, wow, that really resonates with me.
Yeah, gosh, that's a lovely quote. And I agree. It's the me society that we created from the 80s onwards, certainly in the UK here, isn't serving us very well. Yeah, but it's fascinating. It's something maybe I haven't thought about, and I've worked within mental health, is thinking about, everything's very much based on a kind of white Western kind of model, isn't it? Including coaching models. And I know we're going to be discussing that in some of our podcast series coming up, but I guess it's the same with mental health as well, to think about diversity and different cultures. Would you like to say anything more about that, Leyla, while we're on the topic?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Maxine. I think that this is the thing, and often things that are daubed as, right, this is the way you do things, this is what Western, global North, quote unquote, modern medicine says. Actually, they're things rooted in so many cultures in so many different ways. And this is something I talk about in my TedX talk about the connection between culture and mental health and race in the workplace. one of the conversations I had with the brilliant Jenny Garrett, who's a coach and was my coach, that actually got me to think about my business was for South Asian Heritage Month, and how when you get, often, if I speak from my slice of South Asian culture, women will be in the kitchen, whether it's a big event or a small event, and we will be around the kitchen. Someone will be doing the coriander, like picking out the leaves. Someone will be stirring the pot. Someone will be cooking the rice. And actually, you're having these conversations. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily always perfect. It doesn't mean that anyone's going out to coach, but those are coaching environments, actually. And for me, I think often with global majority collectivist cultures, you've got people sitting around in a circle. You haven't got the lines so much, which can be, I think that to me is a very sort of Western global North thing. I think if you look at elements of Southeast Asian culture, and I'm not an expert on this, but again, the collectivism, the Confucianism principles, you look at the way in which people will always look to elders, and we're not saying they're always right, but the idea that someone elder has knowledge, they're not to be disregarded, or that crazy old person. So a lot of the language is very different. And I think methodologies, so things like cooking, things like particular drumming from different areas of the world, and drumming will look very different, but you've got that communality of it. Poetry, so poetry has been huge features of so many cultures. And I think what's interesting is that, again, I think in the UK, it's only certain people. When you're at school, you write poetry, but it's very much, well, only certain people who are really good have their poetry put up on the wall. And actually, if we think about Pakistani Urdu culture, it's very much rooted, it's very beautiful poetry. The language is very deep and complex. Shairi is a whole thing, but yes, you have the Shairi masters, but there's something much more that everyone can be included in it. And for me, those are all things that support mental health and well-being.
Gosh, well, there's so much in there, Leyla. Poetry is one of my passions. I write poetry. It's been a saving grace many times. And yeah, like Sufism has wonderful poetry. There's such rich poetry from different cultures, which could be a whole other conversation. Yeah, but that's wonderful. But also I was thinking about when you were talking about the cooking. Mm-hmm. If I go back to my childhood, how this awful British stoicism that we have, and the lack of conversation, the lack of care for mental health that exists in the culture I was brought up in, where you didn't talk about this, so much you didn't talk about, and it didn't do me any favours, I must say. And actually, I'm thinking, God, how wonderful that would be to experience that kind of thing where you're, like you say, you're in that environment, and it's, so there's a lot to learn, isn't there, from each other. That's the wonderful gift as well about talking about these things, because I'm just thinking that what I could learn from you in that space.
That's really lovely to say. And I think the caveat here is I didn't grow up like that. So I didn't grow up within my community. So I think I've really been through a period of grief, and I'm still going through that. But in later life, I've had that. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about British stoicism, because I think definitely my slice of South Asian culture could have a bit more of that. Everything's quite dramatic. Everything's quite high stakes. So it's how you meet in the middle, isn't it? So what certain members could learn from you and your approach around a bit of stoicism, and then what maybe from what you told me you could learn or understand about how do we have these conversations. And I think there's lots in language. Language will lend itself very differently. And I always talk about English spoken in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and the differences. And actually another interesting example is if you've watched Derry Girls, which I adored, and it was just brilliant. And actually how that Northern Irish Catholic culture is very similar to South Asian culture. You know, the granddads in the house, they're all talking, they have these shouting matches at each other and then it's fine. But that's very different to English culture, or my perspective of English culture. So again, within quite a small country on a map, the differences and then the commonalities and the differences, and where we could meet in the middle and learn from each other.
Yeah. Oh, God, it's fascinating. It's funny what you said about, I had a lot of friends from Derry, so I know exactly what you're talking about when I was younger. And I deliberately, when I was a nurse, deliberately moved to London to go to a hospital that had a multicultural kind of experience for me, because I came from the country, you know, a little sort of didn't know anything, and had a wonderful time actually learning and experience the different colours of all the tapestry that we weave together. And it's great to have these conversations and to learn where we need to let go of some of the stuff, like the British stoicism, for instance. I don't think it helps us. I think it's what creates a lot of anger, because there's a lot suppressed and it comes out in that way. So we could introduce more warmth and more honesty. But then, as you said, maybe you could do with sometimes with a little bit of us. Yeah, I could go off in so many directions, but we'll just backtrack a little bit, because were you always a coach, or did you do something before? What brought you into coaching?
Yeah, no, I've been a coach since 2016. I finished my training, and that was when I worked at Imperial College London. So I was head of the Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre there. And as part of that, they did have an internal coaching academy. I'd had some coaches in the past. It's something I really wanted to do. So I put my name on the list and I got through, and we trained with Jackie Arnold, one of the top leaders in coaching, and her many books with her colleague. And yes, and so we did internal coaching. And then when I left in spring 2017 to start my business, I obviously could take the qualification with me and did coaching that way. And I think it was always something I wanted to do. And when did I know that? I think probably as I was transitioning from working from the University of Oxford into Imperial College London. And I think I'd had a coach at Imperial, that's right. And he was brilliant. And I on purpose, I chose a white senior male to coach me. And that was very good because he was really helping me navigate the politics. So that's stoicism, your point. And I think for me, one of the things about white British or white English culture is it's very avoidant. And I'm not very avoidant. Yes. So when you confront things, you're hit with this, who do you think you are? But it comes out, like you rightly said, Maxine, in this very passive aggressive language that often needs interpreting. So even though I'm bilingual, and I spoke English from a young age, I just couldn't understand the subtext of things.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad I had that coach, and it was just really useful. And I thought, oh gosh, I'd really love to do this. And I guess because of my role, and I was doing at the time a lot of casework for disabled staff members who are having an incredibly difficult time getting their workplace adjustments put in place. So I thought the skills will not only help me in my job, but I can also help other people with this navigation. And looking back on it, because I think another feature of my culture is we don't really have boundaries. And so I ended up you do everything for everyone. And it really helped actually with the idea of, okay, what would you like your manager to know? What would be useful to tell them? What do you feel fearful of? And you're using those coaching questions to get people to take responsibility, because what was actually happening is I was going, okay, yep, give it to me. That's fine. I'll sort it out. But you can't sort out 20 distinct cases around an institution where actually it should be a shared responsibility.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And the ethos of coaching is about agency and empowering people. It's not about burdening yourself with more. So that's a really great use of coaching, I think, what you just said there. Diversity, has that always been a passion of yours? It might seem obvious to ask this question because of your background, but was there any specific things in your life that drove you into wanting to take action and this be part of your career and your life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking to a former colleague about this the other day. I think it was growing up in 90s Kent, and Kent is not the most diverse place now. So you can imagine what it was like in the 1990s. It was a really big school. It was a very big grammar school, and I'm very lucky to have gone there, actually. But I think in the whole school of about 1,000 girls, because we were girls at the time, I think there might have been 5 black pupils and then maybe 25, 30 South Asian pupils throughout the whole school. So it was incredibly isolating. And then, okay, there's that. And I think if I'd been in London, it might have been different. But because it was Kent, the culture was very much people's parents had met at 16. They'd been at the boys' school and the girls' school. They'd gotten together and then they had met boyfriends at 16, And so it was just very alien. And I was born in the States. I moved to the UK when I was 8 or 9. So it was just incredibly isolating. And I think it's more that inclusion part, actually. I never felt like I belonged. Then I didn't grow up with any of my community. I didn't grow up with any of my relatives, which I think has its pros and cons. And so I just always felt, and many of us talk about this actually, particularly that generation, like an inside outsider. My first job was an elected student union officer, which was fantastic. And then, of course, you go into the real world and goodness me, is it a shock. And you go into a real world at the University of Oxford where it's incredibly classist. I never thought about class till I worked there. I never really thought about it. And again, it's very isolating. No one's going to stand outside a building with a race hate speech placard, but they have very sophisticated ways to make you feel unwelcome and to get you back in your box. And there's definitely, for me, there was a sense of, no one said it like this. You should be very grateful. Sit down and shut up. Who do you think you are to do these things? I had some lovely managers there, but getting anything done outside of that was difficult. Yes. So I think my life has always been tainted by exclusion, tainted by where do I fit in? And I know lots of people feel this way for lots of different reasons. I know people who have on the neurodivergent spectrum feel this way. I know people who grew up with maybe in a single parent family in the 90s felt this way. I realize people feel like this for a spectrum of reasons. But for me, it was always about my race. It was always about my race and culture. Always, always, always. I felt very isolated. I naturally gravitated towards this, and it's all about opening up spaces for people and trying to give people a place and a space and a voice where they should and they ought to be.
And that's really admirable, actually. When I hear people have turned their pain into their passion, it's a deeply moving thing. It's also sad as well that it has to happen like that. And I think grammar schools as well have their own flavour of elitism and achievement and competition and all those kind of things. I know because I went to a girls' grammar school as well. So I know that's that. Then you throw into the whole culture thing and the race thing. I can't imagine that must have been very difficult.
What's interesting about it, actually, and this is where stereotypes are very toxic, but I have to be honest and say, interestingly, they worked in my favour.
Okay.
Yeah. So what were the assumptions the teachers made about me? I think I was very academic and I loved school. So that was the truth. But it would be, oh, she's very quiet. Oh, she's very good in the class. She's very dosed. And parents' evenings were interesting. And my parents would be a bit like, are they talking about her? Because she's not actually that quiet. But yes, the only lesson I always used to get moved in was French because I did talk too much, and chemistry. But the teacher would get very annoyed because they were like, we have to move her for talking, but she still does really well on her tests. So I wonder about the pupils, the black pupils that were there at the time and what they faced, because of course they weren't in my year, or they weren't definitely not in my class. I haven't had those conversations. I don't know those pupils. I often think I wonder how they experienced it. But I think for me, the stereotypes about South Asians and Asians being clever and good at maths actually worked in my favour. So that bit was okay. It was the kind of fitting in socially. And also I was an only child. I love people. I'm an extrovert. And I just didn't get that. Or I'd find out people had gone and done something without me. Now, I don't know if it's on the basis of my race. I don't know. But yeah, it was, or is it just, that often girls can be really toxic and people can be really toxic at that age as well. I can't tell you, but I think it was more the isolation on the social side and feeling very out of place, feeling like I desperately wanted to fit in. I didn't know how to do that. I remember watching Neighbours and my mum hated it and she'd be like, why do you watch this programme? And then years later, it's only recently, I said to her, you do realise I had to watch it because I needed something to talk to people about. I had to have a point of commonality. And the fact that just wasn't on her radar, she just couldn't register it. And then I think she was like, oh, okay. But she wouldn't have understood that because she grew up with South Asian people. So she didn't know what it felt like.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you leaped right into Oxford, which, like you say, has its own, it's almost a continuation of your school experience in some ways, I imagine. It's interesting that when employers often employ people from different cultures and they tick the box, but the actual reality and the sincerity of that move is very much exposed in like your experience of the day-to-day working in those environments. Is they took me on maybe for certain reasons, but how many of them are really on board with it? So that, I imagine, happens quite a lot where a box is ticked, we've got a different mix of people here, but actually there's the bias and the racism, and that is still evident in quite a lot of people. Is that true, or is that just me?
No, I think it is true. And I think because I'd had 3 years at Leeds and then I was a student union officer there, very different environment. And I think the interesting thing about Oxford is, though, Kent at the time, or what I experienced, was people who would probably define as working class, lower middle class and middle class. Oxford is a totally different bag. The staff often have a lot of privilege. You don't know because you can't have these conversations. But I think the difference with Oxford is you've got students from around the globe. And in particular, a lot of my allies were American and South African, many Rhodes scholars as well, Jamaican, PhD students. So with those people, we could download and we could have these discussions, and staff. So I think the interesting thing about Oxford is where you've got global majority staff members and the city, everyone comes together to support you. Whereas sometimes if you're in very diverse environments, some people have talked to me about crab clawing, like people will pull you down even if you're from their culture. So I didn't find that in Oxford. But what I did find is I used to call it the quarantine room, that I had to be quarantined. Like I was a mosquito infecting everyone with my work on race equity, and they really wanted to squash it down. It could have been me, it could have been anyone else, because actually after I left, there were a series of people and the same thing happened to them. So in a way, it's not personal. It's literally to do with the work that you're doing and because you don't fit the bill and you're not towing the line. I'm sure that they would love people like Kemi Badenoch. She'd do very well working there, for example, because she tows the line and the racial laundering that's happening. But if you're not willing to do that, I think even if you're a white member of staff who puts their head above what they see as the parapet, you experience barriers, not as much as your global majority counterparts, but it will happen. And I think the class thing's very evident in Oxford, the way in which the racism manifests, it feels very different. I think racism is so complex and it has so many faces and it has so many ways in which it's presented. And the subtle racism that is held by people in power is so toxic because it's very difficult to challenge. Whereas, of course, we don't want people to experience any racism at all. But the recent 2-hour documentary by Hope Not Hate, and again, I would never want anyone to experience what those journalists went through, the undercover people, what they had to hear and see. But you can see it's literally in front of your face. Whereas this power racism that's inbuilt in the power structures, it's very difficult to call out and challenge because it's all above board and it's all following the rule of the law.
Yeah, and it's also to do with people's arrogance as well, in the sense of like they presume they know and nobody knows anyone else's experience, whatever. And you're also a woman as well. And so you've got that as well. You've got the things that happen with you being a woman as well as the race thing as well. I think I'm a bit unusual English person. I'm very honest and direct. So that got me into trouble a few times. I'm a bit like you. I would say things as I saw it, not to be unkind or anything, just this is happening, and ended up suppressing myself an awful lot for a number of years. And I'm coming back out now, but it's a little bit of that, tiny little bit of that experience of when you say something that's not in the box, it really does cause sometimes very nasty, sometimes very, like you say, passive aggressive. There's all sorts of reactions that happen. But this is why it's really good to talk about this and to feel uncomfortable. And I've been called out as well, just because there's belief systems in me that I've inherited that I need to challenge and confront. So thank you for sharing all that and being really honest. And I really feel like maybe we will have you back for a podcast series on this, because it just feels like there's so much to talk about. What about the coaching world for you? Because diversity, that's been mentioned in other of our podcast episodes, the lack of diversity within the coaching world. What's your experience of that?
That's another really great question. And I think I totally hear that. Again, I'm really fortunate because I'm part of something called the Diverse Coaches Directory. And so it's all Black and Asian and global majority coaches. And we have a WhatsApp group and it's very supportive. And I think if you want to be one of those mega coaches and it comes very much from Euro-American culture, yes, then that's a real hurdle, I think, to get to that celebrity coach status, it feels. But again, I feel a little bit removed from that. I think you can definitely find your pockets of people in the coaching space because there are quite a few coaches. And I think, again, the people that come to me for coaching, and I don't have hundreds of coachees at any time. I probably have about 3 or 4 at any given time. So I can work constructively with them. And with my own headspace, again, yeah, I think you attract the kind of people that want to work with you. And some of the coaching organizations, the membership organizations, they do great work. I'm not criticizing that. But when you see the webinars, when you see the CPD events, when you see the supervisory events, it tends to be from a Euro-white perspective. Yes, I think the culture piece is missing. I think the racism piece is missing. I know that organizations had stepped up following the murder of George Floyd. There were some conversations as well after the fascist riots in the UK this summer. But yes, I think it's lacking. I also think it's lacking in the disability discussion space. So sensory impairment, hearing impairments, BSL, there's always a gap with British Sign Language, I find. I'm sure there are groups doing that. I don't doubt that. But then how easy are they to find, or how have they been treated in the mainstream coaching space? I don't know the answer to that, but I can imagine there have been hurdles.
For sure. Absolutely. I think disability is one of those slightly more, in many ways, more silent. And I've got a son with a disability, so I know this very well. Because some of them, particularly if they've got learning disabilities, they lack a voice and they rely on other people to have the voice for them. And like you say, there's so, and that's the same for British Sign Language sometimes. It's something we tuck away in the corner and pretend it doesn't exist, which is really awful. So thank you for mentioning that as another area that needs to be looked about, and accessibility, even the different ways we have conversations. Yeah, are we software? All these things, coaching software, is it looking at accessibility? So there's lots of questions, isn't there?
Definitely, and it gets forgotten about, and I don't really know why. And I always think, why don't we all just learn BSL at school?
Yeah.
I think it's remarkable that we don't.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, because it's actually quite fun as well. I had to learn Makaton Sign Language for my
Yes.
son, and he still loves it. He doesn't need it so much, but he still loves it. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. You do quite a lot of different things. You're obviously a voice in this area. You're doing the podcast, you're doing the coaching. What kind of does your work week look like? Is it different every week?
Yes, I wish I could say this is what it looks like, but it's definitely different every week. And it depends on what I've been commissioned for, what I'm delivering, a mixture of online delivery or face-to-face delivery, which has obviously stepped up over the last 18 months. Mondays and Fridays, though, I do keep for calls. So Mondays I keep for admin catch up and then I have calls. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are delivery days. And then Friday is Finance Friday. So I do all my invoicing, my catching up, and I might have a few prospective work calls on a Friday as well. Yeah, that's what I've had to do because otherwise I'll be training in no time to do the slides and the administration that I need to do.
I love that. I might borrow that. Finance Friday. That's quite good. That's a good way to remember because I'm still not quite in a rhythm with the accounts yet. So there as a tip for everyone out there. If you're not sure, do it on a Friday, Finance Friday. Yeah, that's really great. And with coaching, what do you love most about it?
I think I love the space that it gives people. I love watching people just not feeling they have to. I guess it's twofold, actually. I love the fact that there's the coachee's agenda, but there's no agenda. It's what they bring. I love that. I love the freedom of that. And I really love the fact that it gives people space to work things out on their own terms. And actually, if they don't want to do something, they don't have to. It's an invitation. I like the invitation part. And I think with coaching, you're always improving your practice. And I remember talking about this in the training. Every single coach, no matter how experienced they are, would go, oh, I could have done that better. I could have asked that question more powerfully. And I think it's that continuous learning. You're never done, are you? And how that parallel kind of reflects in our lives as well. You're never really done. You're always on a journey. You're always learning. You're always thinking. You're always getting ideas for your coaching practices.
Yeah, and that's what gives you integrity, actually, in many ways, because coaching is about self-development. So to not develop yourself would be slightly hypocritical in many ways. Yeah, that's really great. And what's about your challenges? What's the biggest challenges? Is it to do with business side of coaching or is coaching itself?
My biggest challenges, I think it's always about knowing when to use the tools that you're trained in and when you should offer it and how you should offer it. The reason I know about this podcast, Maxine, is because of the brilliant Andrea Watts and her collage coaching technique, which is trademarked. I've done her course, I'm trained in the methodology, and I'm desperate to use it, but not everyone wants to do it. And when I have the chemistry call, I'll say, oh, by the way, these are the options I'm trained in. I'll put it in the agreement, have a think about what you might like to do. I'm also trained in something called RAW, which is a psychometric on well-being and resilience at work, and that's quite nice. And I tend to do that towards the end. And I'm also trained in TetraMap, which is a non-psychometric on the nature of communication. So I think it can be this over-keenness. I don't make anyone do any of these things. I include it in part of my coaching packages, but there can be an over-keenness to say, oh, let's do this. But I always have to think about the invitation. And of course, people can accept or decline as is best for them. But sometimes as a coach, you're sitting there thinking, but this will be really great. You want to do it. So yeah, it's a kind of holding back piece on things. And I think on the business side, if I'm really honest with myself, I probably could push more. I could get more clients. But I think that's a conscious choice to not have lots and lots of people, because I find coaching really does require a lot of concentration and a lot of yourself, even though you're not giving advice and doing that. For me, I couldn't have lots and lots of coaches. I don't think that would work for the coachee or for me. So I guess there's a balancing act there.
Has coaching changed you as a person?
That's a great question. Oh, I think it must have done. I don't know if I've actively reflected on that. So that's such a good question. I'm a real fixer. So I'm a real fixer and I'm desperate to fix things. And I'm a bit of a one and done, get this done, move on, get it fixed, move out the way. But I think that's the thing. Coaching gives you the reflection. It enables you to think in these powerful questions. And actually on my desk, I've got a series of questions and I've also got the empowerment. So the opposite of the drama triangle, the empowerment framework by David Emerals. And I put that there, coach, creator, challenger, to remind myself of that. And I think if I hadn't done coaching, I wouldn't have that, because again, my tendency, my synapses are like rush in and fix it. And I have to pull myself back. So I think it has changed. Or difficult, challenging relationships, it's to say, I don't have to know all the answers. And something we learned actually with Jackie Arnold as well is emotions, responsibility, and reality. So often it feels really difficult, and it's about acknowledging the emotion, checking what's happening. What would you like to do? I can see you're very upset. How would you like to proceed? And then the responsibility, how do we get the individual to take responsibility for what they want to do next? And I think that's very helpful with clients. So yes, I think it's all these tools in my toolkit that has helped me not rush in to always fix things.
Yeah, and that's really great information you've just given for some coaches that might not have heard of those things, so they can look them up. And I think a lot of us women recognise the compulsion to fix, rescue and care for everyone else but ourselves. So how do you care for yourself?
I make sure that I get up in the morning and do some kind of exercise, whether it's 20 minutes of weights or some yoga or something. If I don't do that, I feel pretty sluggish. And what else do? I make time to do things like go to the cinema, go to the theatre, do cultural things. So cultural things are really big for me. And recently we moved and the garden is really huge for me. So I'm having to learn how to garden and do things. And actually, initially it was I felt like, oh gosh, this is so much. And some of it's semi there, so there's a structure, but some things I wanted to change. But I'm not one of these people that wants to dig everything up, because you have to see how it sits in the ecosystem, in your micro ecosystem. But it has been about nurturing flowers, and it's really helped with the patience part. Okay, I plant seeds and then I want them to come up the next day, and that's not how it works. Or like bulbs, you plant them now, tulips especially, you plant them now for them to come up in spring, and it's hard. That waiting's really hard. But I think it's taught me so much about nourishing things you can't necessarily see. I know it rationally, we all know it rationally, but then it's the practical side of it. And I think gardening and nature really helps that. And I read Catherine May's Wintering, which I really loved as a book. And also there's another book, and it'll come to me, but it's the patience part, and also how just having to, one of the things for my well-being that I've really had to learn over the last 2 years is just taking it day by day. And I never thought I'd be able to do that. And it's interesting because the point about goals, and me saying I don't push my coachees to focus solely on goals. Of course, if they come with goals, we'll work on them. But I'm not one of these coaches that says, right, before we do anything, we have to do your goals, because I'm just exhausted. 40 years of pushing, I'm just exhausted. So I just have to take it day by day. And I think small things like looking out the window, looking at the colour of the leaves on the trees, looking at what the ground is doing, and just day by day seeing the micro changes actually just helps, especially getting through winter in the UK. And obviously with the flooding in September, that we had some flood damage, which was really stressful. And I just said to myself, okay, is there one tiny thing that you can do to take this situation forward today and not think about the other day? So that really helps my well-being. And trust me, I really was not born this way. It's not innate in me. So I've had to learn this through circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip, though, for our mental health. Often there's a lot of pressure we feel to be everything and do everything. And whether it's people telling you you've got to do a bucket list here and do this and be a super mum and a super career woman and a super sexy woman and all these horrible roles that women often have to play, and men have got their own versions of that. It is exhausting just thinking about it. So it's a great tip. And I know I'm going to get this quote wrong, but there's a quote, I can't remember who by, but it basically says it's not about doing great acts, it's about doing lots of small acts with a big heart. Do you know this one?
I do, yeah. So it's, if I cannot do great things, I can do small things with greatness. It's something like that, isn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's about doing. So I think a lot of us underestimate what we do day to day, whether it's an act of kindness or these little things that actually maybe it's about paying attention to. And it's like that with plants. Enjoy the slow growth, because it's exciting when the shoot first pops up, isn't it? And then you watch it, this amazing thing just grow and turn into colour and whatever it's going to turn into. And I think in a way our life is a little bit like that. It's good to acknowledge all those little moments, and maybe they've in some way grow into some kind of lovely picture, and that balances out some of the mistakes and the things that are more tough. But yeah, a day at a time, it's a good tip. Gosh, there's been so much in our conversation I would have liked to have gone deeper in, but I think it's been really good that you've brought this up. And you mentioned when we were talking about diversity, about a group that you're in, a network. Do you want to just share a bit about that network in case other coaches are interested?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called the Diverse Coaches Network, and it's run by Jenny Garrett. So if you just type in Diverse Coach Directory, you can find global majority coaches. And if you want to join us, you can join. There's a monthly fee and there's a form to fill out. and you have to be a qualified coach. You have with one of the certificates. But if anyone's interested, they can take a look there. And it is a really lovely space and place for coaches to be.
We'll pop a link in the show notes as well for that. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the coaching community? Any tips or anything you just feel you want to share?
We know that coaches don't have to be from a particular background to coach someone. We know that it's about the connection. But I would say always think about culture. Think about your own culture. What's your own cultural framework? And what's the cultural reference point for your coachee? Even if you're from similar backgrounds, you're going to have different cultural reference points probably. And how would you like to acknowledge that in your coaching relationship?
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And where can people reach you, Leyla, if they want to connect?
Yeah, brilliant. LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as my name. So Leyla, Leyla Okhai, Okhai. My website is diverseminds.altogether.co.uk and the Diverse Minds podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast from. And if people want to email me, it's my name, Leyla, Leyla, at diverseminds.altogether.co.uk.
And your podcast has won an award, I believe, as well.
Yeah, so in 2021, it won Best Diversity and Inclusion Podcast in Lindsay Ann Gold's Diversity Podcasting Awards.
Wow, well done.
Yeah, thank you.
That's really good. And also I came across the TedX talk that you did. So that's out there. What did you talk about in that?
The connection between culture, race and mental health in the workplace. So I talk about my own lived experience and actually how we need to think about race and racism and its impact on mental health and creating mental ill health in the workplace and what you can do about it, 3 different levels.
Which is a really great topic. And I love that you've brought that angle into our conversation today, that we talk about culture and diversity and all that, but to specifically zone in on that, the impact on people's mental health is so important. Leyla, it's been absolutely wonderful having you here as a guest. You've said some really rich and deep and thought-provoking things as well, and I hope people go away and really have a think about it and get curious and maybe investigate a bit more and reach out to you if they want to talk further. But yeah, thank you so much for being a guest on our Day in the Life series.
Thanks so much, Maxine. It's been an absolute joy to speak with you and connect with you, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.